Those bulldozers were up and running, and we saw them moving the earth.
If those bulldozers were allowed to continue, a massive drill would soon bore a hole underneath the Missouri River to make way for the Dakota Access Pipeline.
The tension was so thick that something was going to happen physically.
We do this to stop the desecration of Unchimaka. We do this for the next 7 generations. We're protecting the water. Our water is life.
The momentum was there. The people's energy was something I had never felt before.
Standing Rock became the largest indigenous uprising in the U.S. in the last half-century, and it was happening in opposition to an oil pipeline company. The story the lawsuit told was so different from what I'd heard from Cody and others. Source after source had told me indigenous people and nations made their own decisions to stand up against a company that threatened their water and their rights to land. This season of Drilled, we bring you Slapped, the story of an indigenous nation fighting for its water, an environmental nonprofit facing extinction, and an energy giant using the courts to punish protesters.
I went up there with just a backpack of, I think, 3 days of clothes, and then ended up being there months.
People had begun to travel from all around the country to defend the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe's drinking water, sacred sites, and land rights. The Standing Rock Sioux Tribe is a nation, and they argued that Army Corps shouldn't allow the pipeline to pass under the river or over culturally significant areas without substantial government-to-government consultation.
I said, I don't want to know what you're doing, what you're planning. If you tell me what you are doing, and I get picked up, let's say, and they question me on, then you start breaking down the chain of resistance. So don't tell me. I don't want to know.
Security guards working for the Dakota Access Pipeline Company attacked Native Americans with dogs and pepper spray as they resisted the $3.8 billion pipeline's construction.
Criminals! You guys are criminals! Go get your money somewhere else!
People from around the world poured into the pipeline resistance camps, from members of indigenous nations who saw this fight as their own, to everyday people moved by water protectors' social media feeds, to longtime environmental activists who felt a responsibility to show solidarity. They brought military-grade armored vehicles, surveillance drones, and surface-to-air missiles. And word began to spread that the pipeline company had hired a mercenary security firm fresh from the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Overhead, helicopters and little Cessna planes flown by police and private security buzzed at all hours. At night, cold air was blasted into his cell, and every couple hours, an officer would enter and tower over him. On the day after Halloween, the Standing Rock Tribal Council voted Red Warrior Camp out. Part of the reason I was interested in these protests was because they were coming at a time when the fossil fuel industry was especially vulnerable. There was a feeling in the air that something rare and important was happening, but that it could go off the rails at any moment. Medics on the ground told me they treated 168 people for hypothermia. Police kicked out the remaining water protectors camped at Standing Rock, and a giant drill bored a hole underneath the wide Missouri River. The charges were defamation, trespassing, tortious interference with business, and racketeering activities that included drug dealing, wire fraud, and violations of the Patriot Act. In other words, terrorism. Every RICO case first has to define what they call the enterprise, the network of people working together to commit crimes. In this one, Energy Transfer claimed that the network was Cody, not-for-profits, and a group of rogue eco-terrorists, and that it was not led by indigenous people, but by the environmental nonprofit Greenpeace.
We actually got somebody that's working in the legal system that says this is ridiculous. Great. I was like, relief. And then here, later that day, my friend messaged and said, well, that wasn't lived too long. They filed in state court.
What the anti-Dakota Access Pipeline protesters have called an indigenous decolonization movement was essentially an externally supported, ideologically driven insurgency with a strong religious component.
Tiger Swan compared the pipeline opponents to jihadists.